welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm Jessica. I am your host, and I'm actually back with the author, Mark Stevens. We spoke about the Fireballer a while back.
Yeah.
And what's so funny is this book, No Lie Lasts Forever, I saw the description and I was like, oh yeah, that's totally cool. That sounds like a really interesting book. And it wasn't until I was halfway through that I realized that you also wrote the Fireballer, which was another book I really liked. But these books couldn't be more different. Like, wow, you write miles apart from each other in your books, and it's very impressive. So while the Fireballer, and I know you've had books in between and before, and but while that book was like, it was like almost like an emotional baseball thriller case character study. This is very, very different. This is crime-driven thriller that has two different points of view. You have a reporter who made a very, or was, I would say she was really kind of drawn into a situation where she made a faux pas on television, which caused people some hardship. I don't want to say what it was because I want people to read it, and it really took her down quite a few pegs in her career. And then I don't want to call him a reformed serial killer so much as
retired.
Retired. I think he thinks he's retired. To me, it felt like he was personally restrained. He was abstaining from, he was practicing abstinence from being a serial killer.
I like that.
Yeah. In between, there's a crime that happens that seems to be mimicking his crimes, and he doesn't like that. He doesn't want anybody else to be who he was. He's trying very hard not to be who he was, and their two stories come together in kind of an interesting cat and mouse story where they're both trying to suss out who the copycat killer is, but at the same time, he's trying to stay retired and she wants to find out who this person is because you can't bury those urges forever. So, Mark, welcome back. Please tell us a little bit about No Lie Lasts Forever and where the root of this story began.
Wow. Well, first of all, I think your description is about as good as it gets. So I'm going to refer everybody to the first 2.5 minutes of this podcast in terms of trying to get an idea what the story is about. That was perfect. I really can't add much more than that in terms of the general setup. What's kind of interesting, I think, to me anyway, about this book is it's been sitting around for about 24 years. It went to its first editor a year ago in April right now. And it just is one of those things where I kind of just kept working on this novel in the background of all my other books. And I have written 5 books in a mystery series that are set in Colorado about a female hunting guide named Allison Coyle. And then along came the idea for the baseball novel, The Fireballer, which came out a couple of years ago. And just sort of in the background was this book. And I've always kind of liked the concept and liked the general setup. And of course, kept working at it and applying what I'd learned writing suspense or whatever generally you want to say. I just kept improving it. And it finally made its way to its first editor in 2024. And here we are.
It's a very interesting concept. I know true crime is very big, and I know books about serial killers are very popular. But what I liked about this one is you do a really good job of writing, first of all, in 2 very different voices. Like you have Flynn, the reporter, and she comes through and her whole personality comes through and her regrets and how she feels about her family. But then when you get to Harry, like the voice just completely changes. It's just this complete shift of emotion, and you really like feel like you're reading somebody who is trying really, really hard to do the things you're supposed to do when you're normal. How did you work with their dynamic on the page?
Well, great question. I mean, in my mind, there are two pressure cookers, each in their own way. And Flynn has her share of pressure cooker elements in terms of her reputation, and Harry has his own pressure cooker elements in terms of his reputation. And they're both trying to keep their stories kind of intact. They're both trying to work through major problems. With Flynn, it's a career setback of enormous proportions and getting her own reputation back. And of course, for Harry, he could simply sit on his hands and just let the investigation go forward into this new mimicked murder. But of course, his pride gets the best of him. And he, in terms of logic, doesn't want to have the police do any more investigation into the old crimes, fearing that that will lead them to his door using, later and later technology, et cetera. So, I mean, just how I approached it was just basically like you do any character as a writer, you really try to just inhabit their perspective and what they're thinking. And I think it was maybe a little easier for me because in terms of writing Flynn, because I've spent a long time as a reporter, and I spent quite a few years as a television news producer as well. So I had some familiarity with the business. But with Harry and writing a serial killer point of view, and again, this is 24 years ago when I first started sketching him out, but just doing what I normally do, which is do a lot of reading and just try to absorb information about what it takes to move up into that serial killer category. It's not pretty.
So, kind of going with that, Harry was the PDQ killer, which, so if you would explain a little bit about what that means and if he was based on any specific prolific serial killers in the past.
Well, the one that, just in a general outline kind of way that sort of inspired PDQ was the another triple initial guy, the BTK killer in Wichita. And the thing about the BTK killer in Wichita that really sticks with me is as nasty and horrible and as much terror as he committed and the reign of terror he caused in that town, he could have gotten away with it had he not come forward and tried to start taunting the police after he, quote unquote, retired or got to a point where he thought he could at least bottle up all his urges. And the reason and coming back out and taunting the police is actually what led to his capture. And in that case, he turned out to be a high up church official in a well-known church, and he was walking among his victims just like a regular old, everyday person just walking down the street, and here he was. So that case in particular really fascinated me. I read a great book by Stephen Singular, the late Stephen Singular, away last year, but he was a great true crime writer, and he wrote a fantastic book about the BTK case. And there's a lot of other cases out there, as there are, of course, dozens and dozens, hundreds of great true crime books about serial killers.
And Flynn in particular, once again, I don't want to give away what happened to her in her career. And I almost feel like dancing around it is probably going to make people even more surprised because it's probably not what you think it is. It certainly wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But she was, like you said, like she was a bit of a mess herself, even going into that, but I did find just her way of handling what she was getting from Harry and what she was getting from her job and the people around her and this particular, this specific copycat PDQ situation. Very, very interesting. I mean, like, she's a reporter, but she's almost like a sleuth. Was she always like that? I mean, if this story took 24-ish years to write, was she always like that in early drafts?
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes. I mean, in order for her to do what she has to do, the opening inciting sort of moment that puts her out on the street from her station and gets her suspended I thought it had to be pretty dramatic. And then at that point, she's trapped. She's trapped by her need to get her reputation back to save face for herself. No, there's nothing she can do to fix the thing that happened, but she still has a way out. And I always knew that she'd be a pretty intense character. And having worked with a lot of television on-air personalities and having worked alongside a lot of print reporters who are very intense and driven, I kind of had a general idea of what it takes to become obsessed. And that's the best reporters sometimes are just absolutely obsessed with their need to get to the bottom of what's going on. So the first thing, she would be obsessed, but she would also be very skeptical that this person that's contacting her and claiming to be this killer from 15 years ago, she would be completely just, in this ultra skeptical mode. And I realized that he would have to find a very convincing way to prove to her that it's him. And once we get through that stage, then it's kind of, off to the races in terms of how they're working together. But so you had to combine this intensity with also the skepticism on her part in order to make once the relationship, sparked, to make that more credible.
It worked and it all felt very organic. And another thing that I really liked was just the differences between how they related to the people in their lives, with Flynn and her father and her son and her ex. And there's something else I want to say now, and I'm not going to because it's a big spoiler. But just Harry and the people who he relates to and the people who he works with and interacts with in an everyday life. That was a really fine balance. Do you find it hard sometimes to write? I mean, I can imagine in my mind, I'm reading this and I'm like, you don't find it hard to write relationships because you do it so well. But the interpersonal stuff, does that come very naturally to you?
Oh no, I would say it all comes hard. And I've just been lucky to just have a chance to keep at it. I've been writing for a long time and I feel fortunate to have just been able to keep at it and be sort of stubborn about trying to get better and trying to build, characters on the page that have some truth to them as much as I can, bring truth to the characters and the people that they're bouncing off of. And I think there's just so much you can learn by the relationships and in through the dynamics of family or coworkers. And there's so much value in that. You can see what they say to their family and coworkers. You can also get to know what they're really thinking when they say those things. I knew I wanted to surround Flynn in particular, with interesting guys, including her son, who's only 10, I believe. I've just written the sequel to this, so Wyatt's grown up a little bit, but I think he's 10 and No Lie Lasts Forever. And I wanted her father. I knew exactly who her father was modeled after in terms of a reporter who just had that kind of long career as a print reporter and was really well established in the city of Denver. So yeah, it was just building families for both of them in a way.
So I think the last thing I want to ask you, and I do hope that this entices people to pick up the book because it's good. And I remember the same thing about the Fireballer being like, oh, this is really good, written so well. And, just you get into people's heads very, very well. This isn't going to be a series, is it?
To my shock and surprise, it is. I know
Knew it. I knew it. I'm like, this is not the last we've seen of this world.
Yeah, it won't be more than 3 books. My editor thinks it's a tight trilogy. I wrote it as a standalone. When she bought it, she said to my agent that she wanted at least 2 and probably 3. So I just turned in this, we're talking in early April. I just turned in the sequel. It hasn't been approved yet, but turned in the sequel, and yeah, it will be 3 books max.
I'm not surprised. There was a part in the book when, because I know, like you said, you write some series and you write some standalone, when I was like, I feel like Flynn's story is not done yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to go back in and kind of be, that was the one thing I really needed to go in and work on, was just planting a few seeds to keep book 2 queued up.
Thank you so much, Mark. This was great. Check out No Lie Lasts Forever. And hopefully I'll be chatting with you about another book soon.
Well, thanks for reading it so thoroughly, Jessica. Thanks for the great chat. I appreciate it.
No problem. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.